Hello, and thank you for joining us for our discussion around housing associations and how they've adapted to the challenges posed by the pandemic over the last year. We'll be hearing from Nigel Lee from Cardiff Community Housing, who's discussing how they have adapted to the changes, but also what they would have done in hindsight, as well as any future plans that they have. He'll be accompanied by Circle founder Roger Harry, who will be taking us through some of the pressing questions about how Cardiff Community Housing has adapted to the challenges of COVID-19 and shedding some light on the technology and solutions used. So without further ado, I give you your speakers.
Hi everyone, Roger Harry, founder and owner at Circle IT. I work with Nigel for the last 15 years or so, and there's different guises in housing associations, and it's really good to be talking to you today.
Hello everyone, I'm Nigel Lee. I'm the head of IT and procurement at Cardiff Community Housing. I've been in the post since October 2019, so just over a year. I previously worked for another housing association for the last 20 years, so always been in housing.
Great, thanks Nigel. Good to talk to you today, albeit not face to face, but obviously challenging times and a bit more challenging at the moment than normal. You know, firstly, obviously 20 years, Nigel, you don't look that old, I've got to say first off, obviously.
I feel that old.
Yeah, no, I can imagine that the last year has aged us all quite considerably. So obviously it's been a while since we first engaged in those days up in the valleys where we come along and did the first bit of work with you guys. Lots changed since then, and obviously technology's moved on a hell of a lot. You know, it's very prevalent now what we're doing with remote working and cloud and everything like that. But I guess, you know, the main area is what the effect has been over the last, you know, well, since March last year. We're going to probably at least see a full year of it, depending on what happens with the vaccine. How's it been for that? You know, you've seen it in the housing association. You know, how's it work for you guys? What's changed? And you know, how have you got to adapt to that, I guess, is one of the key areas.
So I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head, I suppose, straight away. It's been a challenge. It's been a massive challenge the last year, you know, to mobilise staff in a very short period of time to get them working from home was a massive challenge, because we hadn't had enough equipment for all staff as well, so that was key. We traditionally have desktops in the office, and some staff had iPads going out, you know, when they were out and about in the communities, and that changed overnight, you know. So to get staff then to have the equipment at home, to get Microsoft Teams set up relatively quickly was a big challenge as well, because we hadn't used that at CCHA. So to get that up and running, to get that working, that was the biggest challenge of all, I think. And during that time as well, we also mobilised a new DLO, which is a direct labour force. So that came into play as well, and that was started at April the 1st as well. So it was quite a challenging time. 100 plus staff, trying to mobilise them, getting online, getting working from home, getting an RDP set up right now, setting up for them, remote desktop set up for them as well. Thankfully, we got that set up in January with the help of Circle IT as well, so we were in a good position with a remote desktop connection so people could work from home. But yeah, it was a massive challenge. We overcame it. You know, we had its ups and downs, but I feel as if we're in a much stronger position now.
So how have you? I mean, obviously, there's the main part of the business with yourselves is the community and the tenants. What's had to be done to carry on with the support around them with all the challenges of social distancing and everything else that goes with it?
Yeah, that's been a really difficult one, that is, actually, because we have a maintenance program. We have housing officers, community officers go out in the communities and meet with tenants and residents as well. So that's been a challenge, because we've had to change the way we communicate. We've gone from the traditional where we would generally ring people anyway, but the face-to-face contact has been reduced dramatically. So it's much more communication via, we're using the text message system a lot more, or the phone calls now as well. And we're looking at different technologies now moving forward, and how we interact with our residents and tenants through the use of technology, such as apps and different things as well. But it has been a challenge, it has been a challenge with social distancing. PPE, who would have heard of PPE so much, since the last 12 months as well, and sourcing the PPE as well. So, we're still doing the work we can do, we're following government guidelines, but it has changed, Roger, definitely changed.
Yeah. So are you having to do much in terms of, what you're doing from a corporate system, rolling out into the tenants and into the community as well?
Yes, we are looking to, we're looking to roll out, and this was in the pipeline anyway, but it's just been a sort of strategy has been brought forward, I suppose, 18 months, 2 years. So we are looking at giving our residents an app so they can have information to hand. They do have an online portal where they can log in and check their accounts and report repairs, etc. as well. But we are trying to roll out an app in the next couple of months as well, now to aid that as well for them, so they can download an app which will give them all the information at a touch of a button, I suppose, as well then. But obviously that's not going to cover every resident or every tenant. But we still go back to the traditional sort of phone calls and letters and different things and text messages. But we're trying to just increase our communication methods.
So I guess one of the less talked about areas, and we've seen this in a lot of organisations and some of our big clients like the universities. Typically a Teams rollout would have taken months and months and months to go, and there would have been a plethora of end user training associated with that, and you'd need to have gone through all of that before staff would have adopted it. Obviously, we've seen one organisation who had an 18-month Teams rollout plan roll that out in 4 weeks, and and I think that the mentality was, well, if you download Facebook app, nobody gives you a training lesson, you sort of self-learn. And to a degree, there's an element coming that into Teams with a lot of our customers. There's a bit of help there, and they're giving some portal access and stuff like that. But how have you found that? And obviously, the challenge, without wanting to be controversial, but obviously the challenge of getting staff trained amongst the needs and what you can deliver with all of that side of it, and the speed that you need to roll it out.
I think it's you're right there. I think because, like I said, I think before COVID, I think it was only the IT team that was using Teams initially. Now, again, we were in the early stages as well. But I have to be honest, the internal staff and the management team have been really, really positive, really good with regards to the rollout of Teams as well, and they really embraced it. And we've given the assistance and training needed, but we've set up the infrastructure for it. But staff have really embraced it, really took it forward. And to be honest, we haven't had to give much training on Teams, which has been really positive. I think everyone's kind of adapted straight to it. It is a straightforward system. It does have its limitations sometimes, but it's so beneficial to what we're trying to achieve as well.
Yeah, no, it's certainly one of the winners from a COVID perspective, isn't it? in terms of bog roll puppies and laptops, which.
I think as well, the good thing about Teams is it's constantly being developed as well. So the breakout rooms has come out recently as well. Now it's going to be massive for us, the breakout rooms, because that's what we were crying for previously as well. We are working with Circle IT, but also when your sort of parent company, your company you work with, Valto.
Partners is the word you're looking for, Nigel.
Our partners, not parents. They're not a parent of yours, are they?
Not parents. That's my mum and dad.
But no, we're working with Valto as well on the security aspects of 365 as well. And we have got a plan to start rolling a lot more into 365 now from our on-premise, where we're predominantly on-premise for all our software. We are looking at pushing a lot more into the cloud, and which kind of makes sense anyway as part of our strategy. It's just COVID has ramped up that strategy a lot quicker.
Do you guys, I mean, it's a little bit off topic, but do you guys typically, with a lot of organizations we work with, so many are used to spending in a CapEx fashion as opposed to an OpEx fashion? So
I think that was traditionally the case. I think definitely. I think there was a lot of sort of ring fencing the software and the hardware on-prem. I think that was historic, and that's not just from CCHA. I think that's probably from a lot of HAs as well. I think the plan was always go to an OpEx model eventually anyway, but it was just taking that step to go to an OpEx model. And I think COVID has definitely pushed that step now, where I think us as CCHA are definitely saying, let's try and get as much as we can into the cloud now, not just because of COVID, but because it offers us more of a sort of agile solution.
Yeah, and I guess it's I mean, Microsoft have done a hell of a job of transforming their business to where they are now with this from traditional kind of back in the days. Well, you probably remember when you had Office on 36 discs going one by one. one by one.
I'm not that old. Yeah. No, I do actually remember that.
Get to disc 35 and it's corrupt. Start again. Yeah, no, I mean it's it's done a hell of a job in transforming itself, and obviously the world with it as well, isn't it? And when you look at the way that they've SharePoint was a car crash when it came out first, and nobody adopted it. And then when you look at the way that they've and now everybody's using SharePoint by proxy, aren't they? So it's a pretty awesome job that they've done with that in the background, to be fair to them. So yeah, so I mean, how have you found the impact of these changes? You know, it's it been, you know, you've obviously been pretty, the adoption of it and all has been really good, but you know, is it, you know, are they doing much from terms of, you know, measuring how collaborative people are being, you know, working differently, and you know, trying to get that adoption moved a lot more? And you know, obviously your employees, you know, your tenants, the community, they all have a big impact, all those changes, don't they?
It's right. Yeah. So staff have really adopted to this going forward as well, and we're starting to work with some of our maintenance contractors as well now to adopt some of this technology as well. So we have a lot more communication. So a lot of teams are set up now with external guests come onto the certain teams as well. So the communication flow and the transfer of data is a lot more smooth. We got a residence panel now. We got a residence panel internally that we've allocated devices to them as well, so they use Teams as well, and they're embracing the technology. You know, we've got quite a few tenants who get involved, or residents get involved in the interview process as well now via Teams. Yeah. So they get involved in interviewing, you know, new staff members, which is which is massive for us as well to get their input as well. So yeah, you know,
that's a bizarre one now, isn't it? You know, when you think from, you were never ever employed someone just from a video conferencing call previously, would you?
Well, do you know what? I know it sounds terrible to say, but I employed 2 members of staff last year within my IT team. I've met one once personally, and and I was last. So I employed one last June, and I've met her once, and then I met another colleague then. I interviewed another colleague then, and he started, I think, around September time. I haven't met him face to face yet. It's just the world we're working in, isn't it? I speak to him every day via Teams. You know,
some people might say he's lucky, Nigel.
He probably is lucky, actually. Yeah. But no, I meet him. You know, I talk to him every day via Teams, but I haven't physically met him in the office because we, you know, the office environment when it was open, it was on a sort of bubble scheme. You know, so we had certain members of staff because we, you know, following guidelines and different things, just never got in together. You know, and never been in the office together. So it is different, you know, and it's different interviewing people over Teams as well, because you always got kids running in the background and shouting and screaming as you're trying to ask a serious question, and you know, but I think everyone's accustomed to that now, and everyone understands that's what work life is at the moment. You know, working from home does have those disruptions, I suppose, as well, funny or not.
Yeah. I think my biggest saviour has been ordering a garden pod shed and getting out there so people can't hear the kids screaming in the background. So when you're jumping on, but like you said, most people are quite acceptant of that now, aren't they? Because it's just part of daily life, really, isn't it? And especially now, again, you know, with kids off school, or well, it depends on what the announcement looks like today, but for the foreseeable, I would have said until probably February, it's going to be quite interesting, isn't it?
I think as well, if I had £1 for every time somebody said you're on mute as well, I think I could probably retire as well now.
Do you know what? I think there's a gap in the market for, you know, some sort of device to sort of, you know, like you get those shock pens. It's like you get a little electric shock if you talk and you're on mute.
Because I bet some of the best conversations were happening when you're on mute. Some of the best ideas you have is when you're on mute.
I think the best part is when you just leave people talk and don't tell them on mute till they finish their sentence.
So you're on mute.
I think the best feature is that you can mute them without them actually knowing that you've muted them, can't you? That's quite a cynical feature of the product set, isn't it?
Not I do at all for 1 minute. I'm just putting that out there. Not I do at 1 minute.
No, I've never done that neither. No. I don't know what you're on about.
But no, I think like I said, the collaboration piece is definitely improved. And you know, okay, you haven't got that face-to-face contact with staff members where you go and speak to them, you know, go sit by their desk and try and resolve an issue, try and resolve a problem, whatever. You know, but the software, you know, provided by Circle T as part of our partnership agreement allows for that remote access and remote support as well, and that's been, you know, so beneficial to have the ability to jump onto a laptop or jump onto a device and remote support them, you know, from sitting at home. You know, that's been key for us as well. And you know, like I said, using Teams, using the training, you know, using Teams, you know, daily has been a massive bonus. You know, we are quite, like I said, in our infancy in regards to 365, but getting everything, the next step for us is getting everything to SharePoint with you guys' help as well. And you know, that's going to be so beneficial for staff going forward as well then. And you know, we've got loads of plans, and you know, we discussed this, Roger, many times, the plans and our strategy going forward as well is going to change But it is going to be cloud-based solutions. That's definitely a way we go, and I think most people will go down that route as well.
Yeah, and I guess whilst a lot of your information and data will go into SaaS platforms, like 365, like SharePoint, you've also got some IaaS and other areas that you're going to look at. So I presume Azure is something that you're going to start pushing into as well, Nigel.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
you'll be in there a little bit with things like Azure AD, but then getting a bit more into some of the Azure. We're seeing a lot of our customers now, we've got dedicated resources. This isn't a sales plug, by the way, but obviously, we got a lot of dedicated resources now built around 365 and the platforms and Azure, because we're just selling a lot less tin than what we used to in terms of server storage, compute. It's the world is certainly changing, and that is coming from the mid-market, the SME mid-market up into the large public sector. So it's, for us as a business, it's sort of adapt or die, but you've got to be keeping on the cusp of that, because the speed of which 365 everything changes. I was talking to you earlier before we came on here, it's just the product set is phenomenal, and it just keeps moving and moving and moving. So keeping the guys that know this stuff, and for us as well, partnering, because we just can't deliver the whole product set that's in there. When you look at everything, Dynamics, the CRM, the ERP, the SharePoint, the EMS, Christ, I've just done a whole bingo buzz card there, haven't I?
I think, like I said, from a CCHA point of view, we just scratched the surface at the moment, and I think a good example was, we budgeted the year before last to replace one of our DCs by a physical tin in the office, so like for like replacement. And then, thinking about it and talking to you guys as well, and we decided that it wasn't the best approach to go down. So we now got an AD in the cloud. We've got an AD server in the cloud now, and it works really well for us. So again, we've gone from a CapEx to an OpEx model. Very small. We've gone from a CapEx to an OpEx model, just to show the benefits of it for us going forward.
Yeah, and we've seen with a number of housing associations in Wales and in England, we're bidding one currently, and we're the only one in there that are bidding a full Azure platform. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to get the guys, the organisation that we're working with, we're trying to get their head around that you only pay for what you consume, because I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding in terms of the word cloud is banded around a little bit too loosely. So cloud meaning it's not in your data center in your office. Cloud to us is public cloud. We got no sort of Circle IT cloud where there's a few servers sat in a data center somewhere that we're doing a bit of hosting. So it's either you're going in Azure, AWS, or one of the main hyperscalers, or you do it on platform. But we can't. You're never going to be able to compare with what the likes of the Microsoft and all those guys can do. So it's just about how you adopt their feature set and allow you guys to spin up and spin down as you need to.
Yeah, I think that's key as well. I think working with one of your colleagues now at Circle shortly as well, to look at our infrastructure, will look in the cloud. But not only that, as well as part of the side track to that as well, we are looking at what software we currently got, and whether or not we can put that into the cloud as well, or whether we can collaborate on or look for new software that's cloud-based that can replace some of the on-premise software as well. So a good example of that is we're looking at our HR software. We've got 2 bits of HR software there, on-prem. So servers spun up for them on-prem, in a Hyper-V environment, and we are looking at the cloud-based solution, which offers us, more of a, like I said, an agility point of view is much better, especially in the current and going forward how that looks. But also it's taking our servers off-prem and it's hosted by them, so it's a SaaS model. So they look after all the back end for us, the backups, the update and everything as well. So we are looking at that as a default as well. We're going through our sort of software suite, I suppose, and seeing what can be pushed into the cloud.
Yeah, and how are you finding that? Because we see that in a lot of organisations where they have a cloud-first strategy, and then they go and look for they go to their main sort of application provider, and they're still selling some archaic on-premise system, and they're a number of years behind.
Yeah, so we looked at 2 so far now. So we looked at a HR product. So we looked at 4 HR products actually. We've done our due diligence. We looked at 4 different products to see which best fits for us. And we've done a bit of rationale around that as well. And we're always looking at a product that will integrate as well. We'll have either open API or an API available for us, so we can integrate into our maybe SharePoint or Power BI. We use a lot of Power BI as well. Yeah. And I think key is to have the integration. That leads to discussions normally is the API integration. So we've got a really, obviously it's commercially sensitive at the moment. We've got a really good one now, which I think we're going to go down and use, which is a cloud-based solution, fully cloud-based solution for us as well. But we're also looking at some of our software we got on-prem now as well, and why is it on-prem? So we use something called real asset management, which is it does what it says in the tin, really.
Yeah.
And us on-prem is 2 servers, a database and an application server on-prem. And we've just gone to them now. We've just signed a contract for them to be pushed into the cloud. So they host it for us. It's just taking 2 of our servers off our infrastructure internally into a cloud-based solution, which they look after for us, which is how it's available for us, remotely. And that makes total sense. That makes sense to us. It probably would have, this project probably would have took us maybe 12, 18 months if we were in the office. But I think because of the current environment, because where we want to try and get to, it's ramped that up. But I don't mean ramp it up we're not doing something for the sake of doing something. We don't rush in nothing. We're doing our due diligence. We're doing our work behind it. But it's more of emphasis on getting stuff into the cloud now.
Yeah, and I guess, a lot like what you said with the HR selection process is if those providers aren't in the cloud, then they're going to be left behind, aren't they?
Exactly. I don't see the need. There's obviously going to be some products that have to be on-prem, and I get that, and we are looking at, like, with you guys looking at different solutions then, or even getting to the cloud as well. But, our housing management system is a big discussion point, I think, as well, for a lot of housing associations. There's traditional housing management systems. There's probably about half a dozen that are probably used out to the whole of the UK. And I think they're looking to get some of their products into the cloud, whether some are or some are not, I'm not sure. But I think Dynamics has took a real, it's come in from the side, I suppose, Dynamics, Microsoft Dynamics, where you can customize your own housing management system. I know there's a cost to that as well, and and I think that's a big sticking point for a lot of housing associations, is the cost of Dynamics. But is that where everyone's going to go eventually? That's another avenue, I suppose, where it kind of makes sense to put everything into Dynamics, because, like I said, you've got the ability to customize it to your needs.
Yeah, I was talking to a IT director at a university yesterday, and he was saying you could practically run your whole business just having it with Microsoft soon.
Yeah. You look at the phone systems in Teams and stuff as well now.
Yeah,
Teams, it can be a phone system.
Yeah, there's not much left that they can't do, really, is there?
Okay, and then you sometimes think, and you put in all your eggs in one basket, but it's Microsoft.
Big old basket, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't take over Microsoft. It's Microsoft, isn't it? That's the thing. So the only suppose downside, and there's not downside. Don't get me wrong. They do change their product sets quite quickly and quite often as well, and you got to make sure that sometimes you look at you log into your portal and you think, oh, that's gone. Where's that gone? And you're like, but I've just been using that. So that's the only slight downside, I suppose, of it. But I suppose that's where everything. That's the commercial world we're in now, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, we still get challenges when we talk to customers and they go, oh, I wouldn't put my infrastructure in Azure because, it's with Microsoft. It's like, well, if Microsoft get compromised, then you haven't got a bloody open hell if they're going to get that. Granted, they might get attacked a bit more, but you'd like to think they got a bit more R&D around their security than what most of us organizations have got.
Yeah, but no, like I said, that's our challenge for the next 12 months, I would imagine, Rogers, is getting what we can into the cloud. But it has to be beneficial for both us and our tenants as well, and everyone as well. It has to be beneficial, and it has to be value for money as well. There's always the value for money piece as well. We have to make sure we get the right value for money as well.
Yeah, and I guess a part of that is looking at things like Windows Virtual Desktop to be able to deliver those back. Because a lot of them are client server based applications, aren't they? So they're going to be quite lumpy.
Yeah, they are. Especially the housing management system is, and I think that's traditionally it's going to be clumpy anyway. I suppose you've worked with other housing associations who use different housing management systems. To us, they're all quite. That's the nature of them. They are clunky,
Yeah, no, it's quite a similar challenge across most sectors, to be honest. We do quite a bit in legal and quite a bit in FE and HE, and there's always some challenging application that keeps us in a job. So
yeah. I think, by the nature of the applications house associations, they are going to be clunky because of the data they process, what they do. They are quite resource intensive, and that's rightly so, So yeah, that's the challenge, I suppose. And like I said, our SharePoint piece is taking place now as well, and that's going to be really positive going forward. And I think we're looking at, like I said, looking at our applications and starting to ease those into the cloud as well. So hopefully, then eventually we'll just have 1 or 2, maybe 3 applications that we can't get off our on-prem, and we look at different options with you guys then, how we do as a Windows Virtual Desktop maybe.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, because obviously you're just replacing RDP at that point, aren't you?
Exactly. Exactly. So the RDP does its job for us, and thankfully we got that in when we did last year. I know it was a bit of a challenge, but we managed to get that in beginning of last year, which seems like a lifetime away now. But thankfully we had that in place before everything hit,
Yeah, God, yeah. Well, I just been really good talking to you. There's not a great deal I said I was going to cover. I think that the big $1 million question is hindsight being a wonderful piece, but what would be your thoughts if you were doing this with the benefit of hindsight of what you got now with what we know, if somebody gave you these challenges back in January last year?
I think it probably would have. I think it probably would have been trying to get more into the cloud before then. Trying to get as much as possible into the cloud rather than having all the applications on premise. I think being prepared with regards to the number of, and I know people using desktops in the office. There wasn't a massive need for everyone to have laptops anyway because we were using desktops. There wasn't a lot of homeworking taking place at CCHA then, and there's no reason why that is. But I think in hindsight, it's probably been a bit more prepared for the homework agenda, the agile agenda, I suppose, and getting more stuff into the cloud.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, and it's been I imagine laptop sales have gone through the bloody roof, haven't they?
Well, you can't get them, can you? That's the problem. We struggled to get them, last going off. I think Currys were on a field day. I think they were. We just couldn't get, we couldn't get through the door into Currys. That was the problem. I think, and that was a challenge. That was a challenge for once. He was trying to source the laptops, and we bought stuff, some through you guys as well. But I think everyone had their challenges, didn't they?
Well, you had Nightingale going on at the start of it, didn't you? And they'd hoovered up and had priority on anything. So you were then in a queue being overcharged like anything else, weren't you?
Yeah.
No, it's good. It was a good challenge at the time. Hey, listen, that's been fab, Nigel. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
But great as always, and look forward when we can actually see people face to face again in a semi-human nature, in it, rather than bloody video conferencing calls.
I know. I think people do get Teams fatigue, Zoom fatigue, but I think after the Christmas period now everyone's back and refreshed, and give it a week or two now and it'll be Teams and Zoom fatigue again then, wouldn't they?
I think because of lockdown over Christmas and New Year, I think most people were desperate to get back to work.
Yeah.
Because it was just, there's nowhere to go and nothing to do, really, is there?
I said to my wife, I said I got to travel now from my living room to my dining room now to do some work tomorrow. I said to her Sunday night, I said, at least there's no traffic, I suppose. except my son with his little car banging back and forth, but other than that, it's fine.
Yeah, no, it's good. Hey, thanks again. Appreciate it. Thank you, Nigel.
No problem.
Cheers.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending today's presentation on security. My name is Mark Allford, and I'm the Cloud Solutions Architect for Circle. And today I'm going to be taking you through the security section of this event, where we're going to be talking about the concepts of security and how to protect your data, understanding your security posture within your organisation, and how we eliminate and eradicate the risk of data leakage across the organisation. Now, we're going to try and keep this as technology agnostic as possible, although we will make some recommendations throughout. But the purpose of this session is for us to kind of give you an overview of how all of this fits together with the evolving technology landscape that we find ourselves trying to manage day in, day out. So the first thing I'd like to cover off is that technology landscape, because in a nutshell, where a lot of organisations have grown organically, there are a number of things within that environment that you have to manage, and traditionally they've all been very scattered. There are legacy platforms in play, there's kind of traditional back office functions which don't lend themselves very well to a more modern approach. And then lastly, we kind of have a lot of fragmented endpoint solutions. Now, when we talk about these systems and services within an organisation, they essentially have many areas of management. They do very different things for very good reasons, but to bring a modern workplace and secure environment with the landscape that we now find ourselves in, with people remote working predominantly as a result of COVID, things have to change in order to keep up. And particularly with a lot of organisations now moving towards the cloud as well, these things have to keep pace and evolve with that changing landscape. Now we can also talk about the security layers that we have within an organisation, and they all essentially stem from the user, and particularly when we're looking at cloud infrastructure services or Office 365 as an example. The user is that single identity that is responsible for gaining access into that environment. Everything forms around that user. Without that user's credentials, it's very, very difficult for anybody to circumvent the security layers within a public cloud environment. So if you look at that in context of what we used to see from a user security standpoint, that has always historically been just a password management system. Then we look at the device, and you'd have your historical antivirus services. Your infrastructure would have kind of your kind of standard server security and hardening in play. Your network would be segmented into VLANs and have user-based security on there as well. Then you'd have everything within your perimeter, and you'd have your firewall typically securing that. And as things have evolved and matured as well, we've also had to add in the service providers. So people like us, as an example, that provide services to a lot of organisations, there needs to be security practices in play by those organisations to ensure that the integrity of the security within your own organisation is also maintained. Now that landscape has moved on an awful lot. So when we ask you about how you protect your data within your organisation, it's something to think about, is that these are just some of the data points that we use to map out an organisation's security maturity. Now, when we look at things like this, there are standard or legacy/traditional methods in here around data encryption, system updates, and user accounts you would typically secure. But now we're adding into this a lot more services that need to form the baseline of what your security looks like within any organisation. Now, when we look at the identity side of things within your organisation, I'd like you to ask yourselves these questions as you go through. So when we look at identity specifically, do you know who is accessing your data? Can you grant access to your data based on risk in real time? Can you quickly find and react to a breach? And are users empowered to work securely anywhere at any time? So if we look at the first column within this slide, do you know who's accessing your data? And traditionally, when your data was on premises, that was a fairly easy one to answer. But as we move on, a lot of the data now has moved into public cloud services. Now, whether that's Office 365 or G Suite or some other cloud hosting service that you may be using, it's a lot more difficult to understand who is accessing that data if you're not doing the fundamentals within your user security. So I'll give an example for that. If you don't have multi-factor authentication enabled for your users, how do you know it is actually that user that's connecting in and somebody hasn't managed to get hold of those credentials and are perpetrating to be that user? Can you grant access to your data based on risk in real time? That lends itself more so to the capability of those credentials being phished and somebody accessing that information from another location that was impossible to travel to based on the last login location of that particular user as well. So if somebody logged in at 10 AM from the UK and then logged in China at 10:05, that's physically impossible to be able to travel between those two locations unless you use VPN services and things like that. So we want to be able to contextualize and grant access based on that real-time access request and be able to block that, more importantly, as well. So what we're seeing a lot of now is conversations around how we protect that identity. And there's multiple solutions on the marketplace that allow you to do this. So that could be your standard Active Directory, it could be multi-factor authentication services, it can be Office 365 or Microsoft 365 services. There are a number of safeguards that you can put in place and applications that will enable you to do as such. So if we look at most of the security breaches, most of those occur when attackers steal a user's identity. Once an attacker hacks even a low privileged user account, it's relatively easy for them to gain access to important company resources through lateral movement. Think about what gaps you have and how you can protect identities and proactively prevent compromised identities from being used. There are also services available where organisations can define policies and alerts which learn about cloud usage in that organisation, manage apps and get information needed to learn, analyse and identify suspicious users or device behaviour. This is particularly important where people are remote working as the norm and the edge of the network is further away than ever before. So that firewall scenario where everybody used to access your content and services through that firewall now no longer exists, and the data is moving further and further away from that centralised environment. For passwords, password-based protection exposes businesses to risky user behaviour. So those types of things include recycled and easily hacked passwords. So if you don't have a password policy in play, or if you have a legacy password policy in play, and by legacy those are typically please ask your users to change their password every 90 days, that is typically seen as legacy and old school methods of doing password protection. And the recommended guidelines now are to have multi-factor authentication in place as standard, and to actually not ask your users to change their password, but to make that password a lot more complex in the first instance and protect all services with MFA. Now I appreciate that isn't always possible in every instance, but that is something to consider as you answer these questions for your own organisation's security maturity. So we take that forward and we look at what that modern workplace looks like for today, and there are calls for modern workplace verification tools such as the MFA, as I mentioned, and you include that then with your device management platform to confirm that it is really them even though they are using MFA. And that is something that needs to be considered as a baseline for all organisations going forward. Now we move on to data. So we've just covered user identities, now let's talk about that data. So is your data secured regardless of where it's stored or shared? Does a data compliance policy control access to sensitive information? Can you classify and encrypt that data? And how can you essentially respond to GDPR or subject access requests? Now when we talk about these, I get asked an awful lot, particularly around the subject access requests, on how easy they are to deliver. And that's from organisations that are still predominantly on premises and their files and folders are on standard file shares. Now when we talk about that experience where it's on premises, that is a very arduous and laborious process to go through, and that's if you can still manage to obtain all of that information. That is typically somebody's job to respond to those subject access requests, and it's quite painful. If this moves into a modern workplace type scenario where it's utilising Office 365, for example, and your data for the organisation is predominantly held in SharePoint, Exchange Online, OneDrive and Teams, then we have the capability of doing an e-discovery function which will return the results of the search criteria requested within a matter of minutes. That enables you to very quickly free up the time and resources that you would typically have allocated to this and move that person's role and responsibility into doing something a lot more impacting for the business as opposed to fulfilling that subject access request. How do we control and protect the information within your organisation? Particularly, again, I know it's probably been drummed into everybody now time and time again, but the fact is most organisations can't work in the office now, or they shouldn't work in the office due to the government restrictions. So there's a requirement for them to enable people to work from home. So today's organisations require the security of an on-premise system for cloud applications, both approved and unapproved, for deeper visibility. And those comprehensive controls and enhanced protection against cloud security issues need to leverage themselves to that new way of working. So to put that into perspective, when we're talking about users' data, the concept of that user's data and that work that they have to do, if that's on a traditional file share in your office environment that users have to VPN over to access that data, what's in place to stop them copying that data locally or to send themselves an email, which we've seen time and time again, so that they can work on it outside of the VPN. Now, as soon as that happens, the organisation has lost control of that data. So it's very important to make sure that the right controls and restrictions are in place to enable people to do what they need to do effectively, but also with the right security in place. And when we talk about data leakage, we need the control over the access to information, no matter where it's stored, to emphasise my point, and who it's shared with. If you share information via a traditional method of sending it via email, once that's sent via email, that information is then in the hands of whomever you've sent that to. With modern capabilities, we can enable the sharing of information via traditional methods, shall we say, which will enable you to still control access to that data for that particular user. So that user can't forward on that email that they've just received with very sensitive information they probably shouldn't have access to another recipient. This would all be based on that user's credentials and guest level access. Now that is very, very important for a lot of organisations whereby data leakage is of a very real concern, as it is for most organisations in the main. One of the other risks for data security is the risk of malicious attacks. So if we're trying to protect against malware and phishing attempts, there are new malware variants that arise every day, creating a need to help protect kind of organisations, mailboxes as well as devices against those sophisticated attacks in real time. Now, having a third-party solution in place, whether that's Microsoft, Mimecast or so on, this will give you an additional layer of protection to ensure that your users are protected, because these phishing attempts these days are very, very sophisticated. And in some instances, they even utilise 365 web pages, if you will, or very look-alike web pages that perpetrate to be the official 365 login, and they will attempt to steal those phishing attempts, credentials, in order to be able to perpetrate as that user. Now, if those types of attempts happened and the credentials were successfully phished, then how do you respond to that? Have you, within your organisation, thought about your response and detection methods to ensure that that issue has been resolved and the threat has been eradicated? It's not just good enough to change that user's password now, because if there has been lateral movement within that account and they've managed to successfully gain control over another account, how do you make sure that that threat has been eradicated? Are there tool sets within your organisation that enable you to do this effectively and swiftly to ensure that nothing else occurs within your environment? And to that point, are there tools in place that allow you to automatically detect high risk usage? So it's not good enough these days just to have tool sets that report on event logs, which again goes back to my comment around traditional services. Modern tool sets now use machine learning to be able to detect and prevent these eventualities. That is critical in being able to respond swiftly and identify action which is outside of the norm. So one of the recommendations for us off the back of this is to proactively conduct a risk assessment of your organisation's security maturity. Now that assessment will help you understand the risk and formulate a plan on what you need to do to identify and resolve the gaps that may be in that risk assessment. There are many tool sets out there that allow you to do this. Microsoft have them. There's tool sets by Splunk or Logarithm and things like that. There are lots of different tool sets out there that have the machine learning capabilities built into them. But the very first step I would advise you to do is conduct that risk assessment if you haven't already. And if you already have, perhaps some of the questions that we've covered off today may be of benefit to introduce into the risk assessment process that you've already got, to ask yourselves those questions and to update it if it hasn't already been updated as a result of people now predominantly working remotely. So to summarise what we've talked about today, we've covered off a lot of the different areas, particularly around identity and access management, the information protection policies and that threat protection, that will hopefully give you some food for thought on how to mitigate any issues in the future. Now all of this, I will add, is a layered approach. There is no one item within a security model that will give you the silver bullet, unfortunately. So there is a very layered approach in terms of that security. There is no point in just protecting users' identity and access management, because if that gets compromised or there's any other malicious way into your organisation and they circumvent that user's security, then there needs to be additional services out there that protect the organisation. Now it would be remiss of me not to kind of mention one of the product sets out there, and given our experience in housing associations to date, a lot of the housing associations we deal with are utilising Microsoft 365 product sets. Now Microsoft 365 has solutions to be able to address a lot of these categories. So if we look at the identity and access management, we've got things like Azure Active Directory, which has MFA and conditional access built into it. Then we have the threat protection, where we've got 365 advanced threat protection for email and mail washing. We've got Windows Defender, which could replace your current antivirus solutions. We've then got Azure Information Protection, which is all around document encryption and security, and so on. There's a lot of products within different license types that can help achieve a very good security posture within your organisation. And to sum up, these are just some stats that we have from Microsoft on how their threat detection system and security software enables them to provide an industry-leading service to all of their customers. So if you're interested in discussing this any further, please get in touch. So thanks for joining us for this session on cloud infrastructure. This section is going to be presented by myself, Mark Allford. I'm the Cloud Solutions Architect for Circle, and also my colleague Gavin Forrest, who's the Technical Design Authority. So what we're going to take you through today is the concepts of a cloud adoption strategy and what that actually entails and what it means, how we can enable effective delivery of cloud services within a cloud adoption framework, how we price these solutions, and just some indicative costs around that, as that is one of the biggest challenges that we get thrown at us on a day-to-day basis. And the second biggest challenge, I guess, is how do we then manage and monitor the costs once things do go into public cloud. So hopefully we'll cover these things off with you today so that you can leave this session with a bit more of an understanding of how these things work in practice, what we've seen, and we'll give you a nice scenario as well to kind of hopefully kickstart your journey into a public cloud. So one of the things I wanted to share with you first of all is a survey conducted by PwC. And the results of that survey across the CEOs that they've surveyed is that 76% of the trends that will drive business transformation are the technological advances. Now, if you were party to my previous presentation around security, I talked a lot there around legacy technology. And this is what that means. There's a lot of legacy technology that needs to be adapted to a modern way of working, and predominantly the utilisation of cloud services to gain those technological advances. So what we mean by that is kind of modern workplace services for one. Then we're looking at public cloud services, which enable you to deliver a lot more services to your customers and end users, really. When we talk about the utilisation of maybe chatbots that integrate into your housing management system and so on, that these types of things aren't always available to you in on-premise environments. They're usually bolt-ons that go into those application sets. But one of the key things for me as part of that is, and the conversations I have day in, day out with a lot of our customers and prospects, is that this technological change requires a change in mindset as well. Because things aren't the way they used to be when we talk about infrastructure services that are available to you. Yes, there's still a place for on-premises hardware in certain instances, which does lend itself more towards a traditional management style, whereby you would procure your hardware and expect to see that to last 5 or 7 years, dependent on how long you wanted to sweat that asset for. What we're now seeing a more kind of iterative process in delivering these technology projects, whereby the utilisation of public cloud services, be that things like Office 365 or Microsoft Azure or G Suite and G Cloud, the iterative process of delivering these technology projects enables you to deliver them faster, more agile, and ultimately deliver a lot more services to your end users or your customers. But that does require you to bring the people that work within your IT teams into a more modern way of working if they are within that traditional mindset. So it also requires our leaders to adapt and take risks and learn quickly with this as well. But ultimately it is a bit of a cultural shift when we talk about the end users utilising the technology stacks as well to their benefit. And I think that there's been no better scenario than the COVID one. Well, I say that lightly, of course, but in terms of driving the technology shift and transformation and adoption of the technology stacks than what we've seen over the past 8 or 9 months. This has truly seen a lot of organisations that were pretty much resistant to change have to change overnight in order to deliver the services. So what we're going to cover off next is the adoption framework that we can use. And whilst this specifically says the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure, this will lend itself to any public cloud or hosting environment that you're looking for. And the way that this is categorized now, it's trying to align all your business processes, your people and technology strategies into an overarching portfolio that you can utilize for the organization to drive that change within. That will help guide you to deliver faster results with the stability you need, but also underpinned by the best practices, your templates, your tools, your documentation, so that it allows your people, your process, and your technology to continually evolve. As I said, these are more iterative technology projects as opposed to the project that gets implemented that might take 12 to 18 months to get delivered, and then you would wait another 5, 6, 7 years to revisit that project and change it or deliver something else. And in some cases, just actually replace the hardware and keep your software stacks in exactly the same place. Those days, unfortunately, or fortunately I should say, have moved on an awful lot. So the amalgamation of those software vendors and how you deliver the services back become one, whereas they were traditionally seen as two separate siloed areas. So when we talk about the cloud adoption framework and the strategy that you're working towards, the framework is exactly that. It's a framework. It's an overall structure for the cloud adoption framework that aligns or allows you to align yourselves to a typical cloud journey. It is not a linear process, and in reality it follows a cycle, and repeats itself as a cloud adoption evolves. Now, the very first thing we need to do is define a strategy. And those things are clearly around what your motivations are, what the business outcomes are, what the priority of the project and finances come into play. Then we move into the planning, the readiness and the adoption stages. And that is then underpinned by the governance and management. Because management of the traditional infrastructure services differs when you move into a cloud-based environment. It's all around how those services can drive more back to your users and customers, as opposed to doing your traditional management of that infrastructure where you're managing disk space, keeping the lights on and doing business as usual support. This now enables you to leverage the capabilities of what a public cloud has so that we can plan correctly for it, we can get ready for it, and then we can adopt it effectively. So when we talk about the strategy, we continually have conversations with customers that have been given an executive kind of thought process on, we want to move to cloud. And our initial conversation is usually around what are the motivations for that cloud migration. Because there are typically two ways that we look at this. One of them is migration and the other is innovation. So we can look at this as the slide shows here, whether it's cost saving or optimization, or whether you actually want to deliver better customer services experiences. So do you want to provide large data analysis services so that you can provide more intelligence into the service that you're using, so you can get better effectiveness out of what you can do and enable your customers to do more with what services you're providing? Or is it a simple case that you need to do some cost savings, so you want to move your infrastructure into the cloud? So these are quite pivotal in your decision making process and how you want to get to the cloud and how you will get there. When we look at the rationalization of that digital estate, then we're ultimately left with three different ways of managing this. Because cloud rationalization is the process of evaluating assets to determine the best approach to hosting them in public cloud. And in all instances, if cost is a driver to move to public cloud, yet you're not following a cloud adoption framework, the likelihood is that you'll just end up rehosting your current services in the format that they currently are designed. Now, for anybody that would do a like-for-like comparison on that, it isn't the most cost-effective way of delivering those services. And a lot of instances, the conversations that we have pivot around what other tool sets are available. So when you kind of look at your infrastructure migration, for example, if you do a complete rehosting of your environment, then in all reality you would look at moving things like your file share, your telephony and so on into a software as a service based approach, as opposed to hosting it as a file server in Microsoft Azure. So in this particular instance, we would look at retiring those file servers and utilising the services that you're probably already paying for elsewhere, and then we would look at refactoring and re-architecting other services like SQL into SQL as a service, for instance, and move those services to be as cost effective as possible. Now, I'm going to briefly talk about the cloud adoption plan templates here. We'll share the link with you, but this is something that Microsoft provides as kind of templates so that you can go off and look at this. So if you are at that inception of considering public cloud, or whether you're quite far down that journey, it's still worth reviewing the cloud adoption framework tool sets that are out there, particularly for ongoing management as well. And that could then help your people and your processes to ensure that you're managing that public cloud effectively. And if you haven't started that yet, it's a perfect time to get your strategy defined, and then we can go and plan the next phases of that cloud journey. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to hand over to Gav, who's going to talk about the public cloud and pricing. So we're going to scenario size this for you and give you some real world examples and pricing of that particular eventuality. And then we're going to talk about how we manage and monitor the costs within that public cloud environment. Because as and when you get into Microsoft Azure, it's just as important as the pre-scoping to manage and monitor the costs of your ongoing infrastructure and services within that public cloud. So Gav, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. I get asked a lot by our customers, how do we accurately estimate the costs for running services in the cloud? Over the next few minutes, I'm going to run through the Azure pricing calculator. This will hopefully demystify some of the perceived complexities around pricing cloud infrastructure. I'm going to play out a scenario whereby I've been passed a piece of work to deploy a proof of concept for a new housing management system. Within the scenario, I will be pricing up a 3-tier application. So that'll consist of a database, an application, and a web tier. In addition to those tiers, I will also deploy a VPN to my on-premise infrastructure to allow communication from my existing servers into the proof of concept environment. The reason the cloud really works for this proof of concept scenario is I've got no upfront costs for any hardware that's required as part of the proof of concept. I've got flexibility and I only pay for the resource that I use. This is a new Azure subscription with no existing services in place. So to begin pricing the proof of concept for the housing management system, I'll head to azure.microsoft.com. Then within pricing, I have the Azure pricing calculator. Once that launches, I'll see Azure products available at the top of the page, and I can search here for specific products if I need to. So for example, VPN gateways, etc. Once I've added the product from the top of the page, I then have the bill of materials at the bottom. So each component that is required as part of the solution, I can add to the bill of materials here. Now for the proof of concept, rather than adding each individual product one by one, I've already pre-prepared a bill of materials. And what I'll do is I'll drill into some of the products here to sort of show you some of the variables, some of the configuration options, and how it all comes together to give you a final price. So as I mentioned earlier, it's going to be a 3-tier application. So I've got my 3 virtual machines, my database, my application, and my web tier. I can drill into each one of these. And for example, on the database tier, I can see the database server is in the Azure UK West data center. It's running Windows, although I do have the option to change that to Linux if needed. It's going to be a SQL server. It's going to have 4 cores, 16 gig of RAM, and 100 gigabytes of temporary storage, and that gives me an hourly cost to run the VM. Now, as far as the resource required to run the services, I'd approach the application vendor from the housing management system to get their thoughts and recommendations. But needless to say, whatever the requirement is, there'll be a t-shirt size that fits that requirement. 1 virtual machine, 1 database server, and importantly, I've specified that it's going to be running for 250 hours within the month. That's important because I know I'm not going to be working on this proof of concept out of hours, so I don't need this VM to be running 24/7. It's just going to end up costing me more if that's the case. So I'm only going to run the VM when it's actually needed, and I've calculated that working hours within a month, that would be around 250 hours. I've got the license associated to this server as well, so it's got a SQL Server standard license associated with it, so that'll then be included in the price to run the virtual machine. Now, if you've got software assurance in place already, then you could use hybrid use benefits and actually use that SQL license within Azure to further save costs. I could, if I want to, reserve the instance, but as this is a proof of concept and it's literally, as soon as the testing of the system's done, I will power down the environment and incur no further costs. So I want to pay as you go, But if this is a long-term, an application that's going to be online for a number of years, then it's worth looking at the reserved instances, because as you can see, there are significant savings to be had by reserving those instances. Managed disk storage transactions of bandwidth I've already pre-configured, but again, managed disks is essentially going to be the operating system disk for this database. I've also added a storage account in here, which contains additional disks for my database. So for example, I'll have my operating system disk, which is within the virtual machine itself, and then I'll add some premium storage, which is essentially 2 disks to run the database itself and to house the log files. And it's a premium disk, so I'm going to get low latency, so the best possible performance for my application. I've then got my VPN Gateway, which is the VPN from Azure into my HQ, which allows connectivity from my on-premise systems into the proof of concept environment. Again, this will be in UK West. Basic VPN SKU is what I've specified as far as this proof of concept goes, because again, I don't need a high SLA on this. You know, it's essentially just to allow me to test functionality. I've also estimated the amount of data consumed or egress traffic from the VPN gateway itself at 200 gig, and you can see there's a cost associated with that, as there is on all services within Azure. You pay for the data leaving the data center. I've then added an IP address for the VPN, so that gives me an endpoint to connect to from my on-premise VPN client. And I've also added Azure backup into this as well. So I want to make sure if I make any mistakes during the process of building out the proof of concept and testing the proof of concept, that I have a rollback, so I don't have to rebuild the environment. And again, this will be located in UK West. We're backing up Azure VMs, and we're going to protect the 3 VMs that are part of the application itself. And I'll back up those and retain those for 7 days, essentially. So there we can see all the components that form my housing management proof of concept. At the bottom of the screen then, I've got an estimated monthly total for running those services. So in this case, it's £311.05 per month to run this proof of concept. I can then export this pricing calculator to Excel. I can then forward that on to my line manager for approval. I can also export it and send it to the vendor for my housing management system and get their views on the resource and associated VMs that have been deployed. I can then save that for future use, and I can save as, if I want to create a new proof of concept, I can create a new estimate, and essentially I'm up and running already with the pre-configured items there. So hopefully that gives you a very high level view of the Azure pricing calculator and shows you how logical it is in how you can start building out estimates for running resource services and applications within Azure. So now you've seen how to cost cloud infrastructure. The next question we often get asked from our customers is how they manage and monitor their cloud spend. So the good news on that is that Azure provides inbuilt tools that continually analyze cloud spend. And the areas I'm going to focus on in the next demonstration is visibility into that cloud spend, and not only the current spend, but also the forecast of that spend into the future. And that can be weeks, months, up to a year. I then want to touch on accountability and how we can proactively alert key members of staff that they've exceeded certain thresholds or are likely to exceed certain thresholds as far as budgets go. And the last part I want to cover is the continuous optimization of the Azure environment. So as well as being able to analyze cloud costs, Azure provides powerful tools to optimize resources already running in the cloud. And this can help actually save money and suggest methods or alternate infrastructure that can actually save you money once you're running in the cloud as well. So I'm going to start off by showing you the visibility of cloud costs within Azure. So I'm currently at portal.azure.com within my Azure subscription. I'll then search for cost management and billing, which is essentially the service within Azure that's going to provide me the insight that I need. And then jump over to this tab. So once I'm in cost management and billing, within cost analysis, I can see in front of me the current accumulated costs for the month of Jan. So dark green are the costs I've consumed so far, and light green is the projected costs based on the usage, previous usage. So that's for everything within Azure. Below that, I've got various pie charts which I can drill into, so they're all interactive. I can drill into these to see specifics. So for example, my virtual machines, my SQL databases, Azure Site Recovery, backups, VPN gateways. I've got a complete breakdown of each individual cost. And then beyond that, we've got things like resource group names. So these are customizable metrics that will be deployed at the time of the initial Azure setup, and they'll be related to the business requirements. So for example, it might be you might have resource groups by application or department, whatever it might be that's important within the business. As long as we can get an understanding of the requirements and how you'd need to view budgets, they can be pre-configured in advance. Once you're happy with the view, you can then save the views, you can share them with colleagues, you can download them to Excel spreadsheets. You can even automate the export of Excel spreadsheets on a timely basis if need be. So that's very briefly the overview of costs within Azure. What I want to now touch on is governance and accountability for these budgets. So I'm just going to jump across here to a predetermined budget that I've configured. So this budget runs within a month, and it defines the amount of spend within the Azure portal. So this spend will usually be defined from the initial exercise on scope in the Azure environment. And what it allows me to do is, once I've defined my monthly spend on Azure, I can then set alerts when, for example, I reach 75% of my budget, 80% of my budget, 85%. So people are alert and are aware of where the spend is currently at. What budgets also allow me to do, if I go back to the previous graph that we were looking at, I can apply my budgets to the overall spend. So this is my Azure cloud spend, £7,000 a month. And then I can clearly see on the graph the red line, which indicates my maximum budget. And I can see at the end of this month, I'm well within that spend. If I were, as an example, to reduce that spend to £4,000 a month, we can then quickly see within the month of January, costs incurred so far, forecasted costs, and also when I'm likely to start exceeding that budget. This is on a monthly basis. I could look at that per quarter. I could also look at that per year. So there we've got starting to get accountability, alerting, and governance around those budgets, those predefined budgets. Last but not least is the continuous optimization of services on Azure. So within the advisor, Azure will help us better understand the infrastructure and suggest cost savings. So in this example I'm looking at here, it's suggesting that there are a number of VMs, so 4 virtual machines within this environment that are underutilized. So if I drill into this, I can quickly see the potential savings that can be made, and also the VM size, so the resource that's assigned to the VM, compared to actually what should be assigned based on previous usage. So I can go ahead and resize those VMs, or I can postpone or dismiss those actions. The only time I'd really look at dismissing those is if the application vendor themselves are dictating to me the resource that's required to run their application. But what I could do in that scenario is actually export the usage patterns for the application, send it to the vendor, and explain to them that actually, yes, they have best practice around resource assignment for their application, but actually, based on usage, based on trended usage, we believe in our scenario this could be reduced. And from there, you may come to an agreement. They may stand firm on the requirements for that. The other recommendation I've got here is the reserved instance function. So Azure is telling me, rather than running pay-as-you-go virtual machines, if I were to reserve an instance for a period of time, these are the potential savings that I could realise. So just to recap, we've been through the visibility of costs within Azure. We've been through assigning budgets and governance within Azure, and we've also looked at the continuous optimization benefits that Azure also offers.
Thank you for joining us for today's event. We hope you enjoyed the talks and have had some useful takeaways from the discussions. If you have any further questions and would like to speak to one of our experts in more depth, please get in touch and we'd be happy to answer any further questions you have. Thank you.